This episode is brought to you by LaFosse Academy, a program dedicated to helping people from diverse backgrounds break into the tech industry. They don't just train you with the skills you need, they help you to land your first role, give you real-world experience and a strong foundation to launch your career in tech. For businesses, the Academy offers a way to build diverse, future-ready teams while creating opportunities for talented individuals who might not have had a traditional route into tech. So, whether you're looking to start a career in tech or you're a business leader ready to build a stronger, more diverse team, speak to LaFosse Academy and take the next step. At Elevate Colour, we're proud to share their mission to level the playing field and create a tech workforce that truly reflects society. Hi everyone, welcome back to Race to the Top with me, Okielazi. My guest today is Delroy Corinaldi. Delroy is the Executive Director and Co-Founder of the Black Footballers Partnership. It's kind of like a special episode today because we kind of really focus in on the thing that he's been trying to solve. We talk about the issue of the lack of representation of black players in management roles in football. And what's motivated him specifically to try and fix it. And then we kind of walk around the correlation of that with the issues of the lack of representation of people of colour in leadership roles in business and how those two things are intertwined and affect each other. As a football fan myself, it was an incredibly fascinating conversation, and actually hearing the nuances from someone who's living and breathing it every day was incredibly enlightening. So I hope you find it enlightening too. Let's get into it. With all of that, welcome Delroy. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Well, great. Interestingly, we normally go chronologically through a career. We'll start with who you are and what you're about, and we will do all of that. But the reality is I'm a huge football fan, couldn't be a bigger football fan in many ways. And what you do and what your organisation do is fundamental. And actually, I'd like to tell our listeners, when we first had a conversation and I was talking about how I felt that the lack of black managers in the Premier League and in football generally was an example of institutional racism. And you said to me, it's not an example, it's the example. And that's stuck with me for months and months and months since we had this conversation. So I'm going to start with that, right? I'm going to start with, first of all, you're the director and co-founder of the Black Footballers Partnership. What does that actually do?
Well, as I say, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Talk about Black Footballers Partnership. We love nothing better at this time. And like you, and I suspect a large number of your listeners, I'm a huge football fan myself.
Good. Who do you support, by the way?
I'm a Liverpool fan.
A Liverpool fan?
But
are you very happy at the moment?
Look,
as we record, we're very happy. You're very happy.
Well, football fans are never happy, right? We've always got something to gripe about. How did we draw 2-2 against Manchester United? Yeah. Trent's contract, Virgil's contract. Mo Salah, will he stay? Will he go?
Yeah.
We've always got issues. We're always worried that we're going to fall off the top of our perch. But we'd rather be where we are at the moment than even where Manchester United is.
And it's unexpected as well.
And it's unexpected. We've got a new guy in at the top called Slot.
Yeah.
We're very happy with that, But actually, in the last few weeks, before we come on to Black Footballers Partnership, I've been to Arsenal games.
Right.
I've been to Sutton United game. I've been to watch Orient play against Burton Albion. I've been up to Burton Albion. I've been to a whole host of grounds, so from non-league to League 2, League 1 to the Premiership, because I love football and I love watching the game. I love engaging with people in the game, both fans, footballers, owners. I'm lucky enough to be able to talk to them all. And I guess it's through that passion that we ended up with this wonderful organisation, or at least I think it's wonderful, called the Black Footballers Partnership, right?
So how much of what you do every day is going to football?
Oh, not enough.
Right, okay.
Not enough. I want to go to more games, to be honest, and meet more people. But what we do really is understand what the problem is, and we do that through data. Once we know what the problem is, we then tell the story through the data that we've uncovered, and then we use our influencing techniques, getting the message out there to try and help the game understand the problem and hopefully get some of that change. So in football terms, we say, right, okay, how many players are on the pitch? We know that. What percentage of those players are, as in the name, black? And then what is the impact on those players throughout their careers of getting opportunities, in particular off the pitch, in order for them to hopefully have a sustainable career thereafter? And I think the point you made in the intro when I said, this is the problem of institutional racism, is because football, unlike most other professions, is the one area where the data is there. It's obvious, it's transparent, you can see it. You can see it with your own eyes in terms of on the pitch, but what most fans, most footballers even, and others don't see is what's happening off the pitch and what that data looks like. So from our perspective, there's a whole pool of, in the men's game at the moment, that's where we've done most of the studying, there's a whole pool of players on the pitch. Great people, I'm sure, multi-ethnic, multi-age group players playing together to win on a Saturday, on a Wednesday, on a Tuesday, on a Monday, all these games that are running through. And then off the pitch, unfortunately, not everyone seems to get the same opportunity.
So much to go to. So if we rewind a bit, how did you come to start this?
Well, I mean, it's quite an interesting journey, really. For some time, we as in me and my mates, have been saying, right, okay, well, all these guys are good enough to play on the pitch. Why can't they get a job off the pitch?
Was that just like me and you being down the pub and saying, look at this situation, it looks strange? It was that sort of casual thing?
A casual conversation. It was before COVID. It was before BLM grabbed.
Yeah.
It was general conversation around, there are more black players coming through. I mean, in numbers terms, there was 16% in the Premier League when it first started in 92, and now data according to Black Footballers Partnership, there's now 43%.
Yeah.
And you're going, right, okay, the numbers are growing there, but why aren't they getting jobs off the pitch? And then the trigger was when Darren lost his job before COVID at West Brom.
Tell us a bit about that. Why particularly that?
So Darren Moore had taken over, I think it was from Tony Pulis when they were in the Premier League, last few games, fag end of the season, they were going down anyway.
Yeah.
He was like the caretaker manager, done very well actually in that role, so well in fact that West Brom offered him a permanent deal and he took it.
Yeah.
And then as the season progressed, they were in the top four and then he was out of a job.
Right.
And to a lot of people, it was, how can he be out of a job so quickly when he's done so well? They're top four, they're still within a chance of going up. And people were texting as they were at the time and phoning, going, I can't believe this, I can't believe this. And my persona, my personality, my history is, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? And most people are happy going on the wonderful Talk Sport and other wonderful
other radio
programs.
Stations are available.
Oh, there are indeed available, including TV ones.
5 Live.
Right. And going on those stations and ranting, and there's a business model in that, get that.
Yeah.
But, I'm more about the doing. So as a result of Darren Moore losing his job, I then said, right, okay, who could I reach out to give me a sense of, is this fair or not fair? Is this unusual or not unusual?
What were you doing at the time?
I was a consultant working for a client in the Caribbean. I won't say where. I was doing other work. I'm also on the board of various organizations. And I was just getting on with my business.
Right.
And then this second came up and I just thought, well, can I flex my contacts, networks, and to anyone listening out there, contacts and networks, no matter what age you are, exceptionally important.
Unbelievable.
Right?
Yep.
To get a sense of what's going on in the game. So I reached out to a couple of people, one of which is now the late but great Lord Herman Ousley, who said, yes, there's a problem in the game in terms of what happens off the pitch. And then he pointed to a couple of people I should talk to get a better understanding, of which one was Les Ferdinand. And that kind of started a journey, albeit a pause in the journey, because I had so many other things going on at the time. I couldn't really follow everything in, but I managed to get a meeting in the Premier League to get an understanding of what goes on in terms of decision making. But I just didn't meet Les at that point. But then if you fast forward to COVID, that's when I met Les and other wonderful people in the game.
So, so basically, something happens, like Darren was sacking, which to me was just another sacking. You know, I didn't think, but something about it triggered something in you to go and do more.
Yeah, Darren Moore triggered me to do more.
Yeah,
good line.
Yeah, I didn't even see that coming. But yeah, you know, so Darren Moore triggered you to do more.
Yes,
but at that time you didn't know what that would look like,
Absolutely
or were you just interested at that point?
So I'm sure I'm like you and a lot of your listeners, right? Curiosity killed the cat. I was just curious about something's happened, what's happened. And as someone who's, as you outlined at the beginning, I've worked in so many different spheres. The obvious answer is often the right answer. Someone has got sacked because the results aren't right. And many people were jumping straight away to an ethnicity thing and so on. And I thought, well, we don't know what's gone into the decision making. So the trigger actually was the curiosity, my own curiosity, a sense of, is there injustice or not? And actually, the background to it all is Darren Moore and others have had great careers on the pitch, but they don't seem to have jobs off the pitch, and when they do, they don't seem to have them for very long. So that was the context of how do we understand what's going on? Does the game understand? They must understand. And then how can we get the game to a better place?
So that was kind of the synopsis that that's like the problem statement, right? Through Darren. I mean, Darren's situation is interesting because he actually had a job. So, you know, I come to it thinking there aren't enough people with the job, but he did have a job. So you almost started from the, when you have a job, you don't last very long. Situation, rather than there aren't enough people doing that job.
So we started from there aren't many people getting the job, but then leaving it. To, hang on, the guy's actually got a job and doing quite well. What's going on? Right? And that's quite interesting as we fast forward, because we've done research now which looks at access to jobs, but also how long black managers, coaches last when they're in jobs. So having, as you say, this was like something there's a problem. And somehow we've ended up with a whole database which has analysed the pathways and the journey of black players to black coaches to black managers, which now allows us to have a narrative around, sadly, what's happening to some of these guys. And it is guys at the moment.
Okay. So problem statement is, so I talk a lot about institutional racism. We talked about that. We touched on that. And the problem statement here is that, let's try and get the numbers right. In the Premier League, 43% of the players what's that across Europe? Do you know? Is that?
We've never crunched data across Europe, so we can't give you that figure, but it will vary depending on what league you're in. All right, so France national. If you look at the French national team, that kind of gives you a sense of what the French league situation will be. And then if you look at other national teams, perhaps Poland.
You think they're quite reflective? The national teams are reflective for the
it's hard to tell, but it gives you a sense of, well, actually there should be some data there that you can start looking at. And I think it's the data that tells the story, right? Because as you will know, and again, many of our listeners will know, a boardroom, senior level people following the game, but not really following the game, they listen for, did you win on Saturday? How many points you've got? Okay, you're buying a player, how much are you spending? So everyone's always looking for that numerical figure, right? So that's why we've gone to this issue from a data perspective, because people understand numbers, right? People who are making decisions understand numbers. If one watched, the FA Cup this weekend and you were watching Tamworth versus Tottenham, we now are talking a lot about figures because Tamworth put up a good fight. They lost in the end, but people are saying, but they lost the opportunity to earn £1 million, which would have allowed them to do X, Y, and Z. Because what do people do? They default to numbers, right? To say what the gravity of the problem. So that's why we've tackled the issues facing black footballers through the lens of data as well as their voice.
So the data allows us to believe that we're cut through the judgment part of sport, right? The beauty of, I always think of running or athletics as being the purest thing ever. You're faster than him. That's it. right? The numbers. You run it in that time, you run it in that time. There's no selection. There is a bit of selection, but anyway. But basically, you're faster than them, right? Football is a sport, obviously, but it's not as pure as that, in my opinion. So my first question is, even as a playing, do you think football is a meritocracy? Do you think football is based purely on performance?
So increasingly, yeah, right? Because the numbers, the numbers, right? So if you hark back to the 70s, right? We had, or 70s or 80s, we had the 3 degrees, right? We had Cyril Regis, Laurie Cunningham, Brendan Batson, and it was like a breakthrough moment. Wow, Ron Atkinson, who's had his troubles, as you know.
Yes, we do.
All right, he's chosen these 3 guys, and why has he chosen them? Because they're the best in their position.
Yeah.
At that time, there weren't actually that many black players. Probably the wonderful Clyde Best before that, right?
Yeah.
And now, fast forward, 10, 20, 30 years, we've gone from the racist issues that they faced at the time, and Laurie Cunningham and others have, talked about them, now departed, of course, but it's been referenced in their books, to actually being on the pitch in greater numbers from clubs in the north of England to the south of England, from the east to the west, because it's a merit-based system on that pitch. And to be quite frank, the coach's job's on the line, so he needs to win, right? And therefore, he will choose the best players for those positions, no matter what. Right?
And do you think that so that's the beauty of a meritocracy, right? And that the football winning, and lots of other sports, is, even if the sport was racist, the winning is even more important, right? And so actually, both for coaches and maybe fans or whatever, the fact that we can win with these guys who are good means that that's what's led to this 16% to 43%, and probably will go beyond that.
Absolutely.
It's the winning.
Yes. And it's the definition of winning, right? I mean, for some clubs, fans may not like this, but I think most people are realistic.
Yeah.
There's only 2, 3, 4 clubs that can win the Premier League. Yeah. There's only a few more than that can win top 6 or top 4 for the Champions League, and then top 6, 7, whatever it might be for Europa. And there's only that many clubs that can win 4th from bottom rather than being in the bottom 3.
Crystal Palace, obviously.
Right? Yeah. Crystal Palace, to be honest, Bournemouth, maybe. Right? So that interesting point around what does winning look like for your club, right? So winning for your club varies depending on which club it is, right? So that's in football. But winning off the pitch, let's say can I broaden it, to politics, is down to more than just, are we choosing the best people for the job? Because it might be, right? We've got, slightly more complicated, but I hope you follow where I'm coming from. In the national election, it's first past the post, right? So whoever gets the numbers which allow you to be Labour and Labour in, straight in. But for the Scottish elections, it's a form of proportional representation. And why am I alluding to this? I'm alluding to this because we're going to have elections in Scotland very soon. And through those elections in Scotland, we're going to have one party, maybe this SNP with the largest share, and then proportionately, it looks like Reform might do quite well. The Conservatives may do reasonably well, Labour may do. We're going to have, well, let's use the word, a diversity of electoral parties, right? But actually, and that's winning. So each of those are going to win in their separate way. SNP would hope to retain being the largest. Reform would like to, winning for them is coming second and beating the Tories. And Labour would like to get as close as they can to the national share. So winning varies depending on which party. In football, right, winning should be down to talent. That's what it's about. It's about talent. It's about those 3 points on the board. But because we don't have a proportional representation system in football off the pitch, winning seems to take a different form. So even though someone who looks like you and I, black, may perform very well when they've had a coaching job, like Darren Moore has performed very well when he's had coaching jobs, he's now doing very well at Port Vale, you would suggest that people like him who are doing very well should get the most jobs or get good jobs, reasonable jobs. But actually, proportionately, the black players are 43% of the players on the pitch, but they only get 4% of those jobs that go to former players. even though they've got the UEFA Pro license in greater numbers, that is the largest qualification, and they've got the UEFA A and B license. So when you look at outside of football, there is a push from a democracy and participation level to make sure that we have that diversity and we celebrate it. Why shouldn't we? Scottish selections, Welsh selections. But when it comes to football, off the pitch, we lose that idea of democracy and participation and representation and the word you used around performance, because the data that we've crunched says the black coach is at least as good as their white counterpart, but they're not getting the roles.
Okay, so that's the problem. Let's rewind a bit. So we agree that broadly speaking, the playing situation is a meritocracy.
Yes.
You know, if you're good at football, you will succeed, because people want to have the best players in the position. They might not have done in the past, but now, because there was judgment. So let's think about it. Because judgment's an important thing. I always sort of say to my kids, don't do sports where it's judgment. Do sports where it's fact-based,
Yes.
right? And actually, even in football for a while, you could have said, oh, well, actually, you know, black people don't make good centre midfielders, right?
Yes.
And you could just have a judgment that said that. But it's very hard to do that now with all the data of running yards and sprints. And it's almost impossible to say that person isn't a good player, because the data will tell you what
the fans will tell you, right?
Yeah.
The fans will tell you no end. I mean, and you've just used the phrase running back, right? So in the NFL, there was a time when there were 0 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Because quarterbacks, they're the brains of the team, and the brains of the team doesn't look like somebody who comes from a black population. Now the numbers are increasing significantly.
Oh, hugely.
Right? Patrick Mahomes being a clear case in point. So there's an illustration of a game and a coach wanting to win and bringing in the best players in the best positions based on performance to give the fans, football, wider society what it needs, a sense of fair play, right?
But the data, what I like about what you're doing is but the data's key to that, right? So you could have a belief before in the NFL that black players don't make good quarterbacks, and there was no real and they do that, but there wasn't enough data to. Now the data is very clear that they can rush, they can throw, they can catch, they can pass, and here's the numbers that show that. So anyone who has a belief gets that belief blown away by the facts.
By the facts. And here's another case, and this is, often these things are about myths and stereotypes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the 70s and the 80s. There was, in that period, oh, those black players, they don't like it up them.
Yeah.
Those black...
Lazy,
right? Mm-hmm. Those black players, they don't like the cold.
Yeah.
Right? All of these things were used to say these guys weren't good enough.
Yes.
And now the data says, actually, they're going to play this weekend as they did in the FA Cup, and they're going to score goals and they're going to stop goals, and they can do much more in between. So it is very lazy, I think, in terms of how people have portrayed some of these black players and footballers. Yeah. And then the issue, which we started the program on, is how does that play out into corporate life, charitable life, right? Are we making the same assumptions in other areas of UK PLC, which is stopping talent from coming through?
Yeah.
So when those people say this is all woke, well, actually, we've now got the data in football to say it's not black people that are actually benefiting from any interventions. It's non-black players, right? So the data there plays to putting woke in the basket. But if you want to talk about laissez-faire and let the market decide, well, if that were the case, those 43% of players would find it far easier to get into those management and coaching positions. So therefore, it tells us there's market failure, and that needs looking at.
So let's go one stage further. Obviously, you can tell I'm intrigued by this. Of the coaches that are in the Premier League or the Football League, how many? Do you know what percentage of them are former players?
I don't know the percentage, but the vast. I mean, it's going to be 90-odd%.
Yeah.
There aren't. I mean, if you look at the Premier League, all of them have played at some level. It may not have been at the top of their game, but all of them played somewhere. There's only a couple of clubs I can think of where they've brought in other people. Remember, now we have a division of responsibility in coming in some clubs where you have the coach, often head coach, rather than a manager, and a sporting director.
Yeah.
Sporting directors overwhelmingly have played in the game, but because data is becoming more and more important in football, there's now a push towards that data-driven person making and being involved in decisions because you're making big transfer decisions, right?
Yeah.
And that big transfer decision, it depends on which club it is. In fact, most owners will want, if I'm going to give you a 7-figure sum plus, I want to know the return on that's going to be useful, and that's where the data comes in. So most managers are overwhelmingly former players, and sporting directors, maybe there'll be a slight shift there, but we're not there yet.
Okay, so that logic would suggest then, if that's true, and I've no reason to believe it's not, that if 43% of the players in the Premier League and 36% of the rest of the Football League, if you had 20% of the people being coaching or coaching roles or even leadership roles, that would be still underrepresentation, right? Not the numbers we're talking to. So there is issue number one, right? Which is, what is stopping that happening? Why are there so few black coaches or people in leadership roles in football?
So the data is. Sorry for your listeners getting bored of me saying the data is.
No. Let's stick to data. Otherwise, we'll be getting
lost.
to opinion, right? And we've all got opinion, but data should drive opinion.
So 43% of the players in Premier League are black. 4% of those roles that go to former players are occupied by black players. Only 4%.
Only 4%.
And just around 1% of any other roles, senior level roles in football, go to black people, right? So it's 43,
basically there's not none, but very, very, very few black former players in the administration and running and coaching of football.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Right, and that number's been reduced because we lost a senior sporting director recently, right? So the numbers they're in your face, right?
Right.
So on that basis, I mean, where are we going here? I mean, what is the direction of travel in terms of what the future representation is going to look like?
No, but why? Why do you think that is? We'll get into the future in a minute, but why?
Well, I think in most fields, you always look at the leadership, right? Who owns, a venture? What's the leadership team look like? What are their values? Do they live and breathe by the words they preach, or is it more of a marketing tool? So I think, unfortunately, you do have to look at the leadership, right? And I think, that's on the one side. On the other side, what I've seen is black players operate in silos. So one person will say something, and then, the other person. So one person who's employed by the game in some form, it might be a pundit or maybe an administrator. They see it from the insider's view, and then the black players, the 43% plus -4, they see it from, actually, these are the struggles I've had. So do they get their CVs looked? Are their CVs right? Do they get their CVs looked at? Are they part of the shortlisting process for jobs? Who's on the interview panels? There's a whole array of questions you can ask as to how do people get jobs? Do they have the right networks? Do they go to the right golf club? Do they do X? Do they do Y? Now we have owners from all around the world. Are there representatives? Do the footballers have representatives that are connected into these owners? What are the fit and proper tests around the owners? What do they look like? What do their network look like? Who they normally employ at senior levels? You could go on with the questions, right? But the facts are, we did a report that looked at 3 things, and performance got us here. So, number one, performance was great, but it looked at access. Do black players get access to jobs once they retire? The evidence there was almost zero, right? Then we looked at, when they get jobs, do they get promoted in their jobs compared to non-black players? And the answer there was very rarely, or not enough. And then we looked at, once they're in a job, are they more likely or less likely to get fired compared to a non-black player? And here, they were 41% more likely to get fired than someone who was non-black. So we have the data points that say they perform as well as their non-black counterparts.
Although small sample.
And it's a small sample because they don't get the jobs in the first place, right? I mean, it's on that point, there's an organization called Smarter Scout, which a number of years ago did some work, and it said out of 1,000 coaches across Europe, only 30 were black, right? Yeah. So that's how small the sample is. It's tiny, right? Tiny. So, we have the evidence that says they don't get treated fairly and there's blockage. Meanwhile, I mean, this is not the data we normally crunch, but in the last few months, what have we seen? There's only 2 black managers out of the 92 professional clubs. One's Darren Moore, one's Nuno at Notts Forest, and both of them won the Manager of the Month award for both their leagues in League 2 and League 1, and Nuno's just won it for the second time in the Premier League, and Nuno's just won it for the second time, right? And I'm not saying that is a way you would do a scientific study.
Still a tiny sample.
But it is still a tiny sample, but it shows, right?
Trust. They can do the job.
They can do the job, right?
But then there's no reason to believe, because I actually think there's a step before what you've just said, which is because I'm doing it like this because I spend my time thinking about corporate life, organisations, and the same problem broadly that exists. And my first thought was, when I came to this, there's a supply issue, right? Yes. So in my world, there aren't enough people, say, graduating with degrees that is a proxy for leadership. Yes. Right. Until we can get more people to graduate in these sort of degrees, therefore there'll be a problem. But when I looked into it, there is no supply issue. Yeah. And I think the same is in football. So I thought the problem is that there aren't enough people doing their badges. Yes. Right. Yeah. So black players are leaving the football and basically deciding to go do other stuff. That's not true, right?
No. I think, it's a fantastic way of looking at it. Is there a supply issue, right? Are there just not enough coming through the pipeline? Yeah,
we know they play, but you can't just go from being a player these days to being a coach, right? So are they doing the requisite stuff to become a coach?
And there you have it. They are. We've done articles with former players like Sol Campbell and various others who have done the badges, got the pro licenses, done well in their careers as managers, but just don't get another role, right? And the data says 14% of those with pro licenses are black, and 1 in 4 of those with UEFA A license and B licenses are black, right? So the numbers are there; they're coming through.
25? Did you say
1 in 4? So 25% of those with the UEFA A license and UEFA B license since about 1920 are
and
black.
The FA badge. What's the FA coaching one? Is it?
It's all the same. It's all UEFA now. It's all about the UEFA A and B and pro license. So they're all getting there in increasing numbers.
There's plenty of numbers.
There's plenty of numbers, right? But are they getting the roles? And then if they get the roles, at what level do they get these roles? We know they're not head coaches. Mm-hmm. We know they're not often sitting in the dugout, right? Mm-hmm. We don't see many in the dugout, right? We probably see 1 or 2 physios and fitness coaches, right?
But not former players, though.
Well, not former players, but we'll see someone who's black doing those roles, right? Do know former players who have retrained and become physios, right? But they've got the UEFA A, UEFA B pro license to be what's called X's and O coaches, right? Technical coaches. Yeah. So how many of those are actually coming through to be those coaches? And we now have a case in point. Mm-hmm. We have a wonderful, talented New England manager in Thomas Tuchel, right? Yes, he's of German origin. Some people have got issues with that, but his record, he's up there with some of the best. Mm-hmm. And he's appointed his team. Mm-hmm. And in his team, at the moment, is not a single black former player. But at the same time, both the FA and the PFA, the Professional Football Association, have got an elite program for BME, right? And the idea is that someone would get allocated to the England setup, as has happened before with a couple of former players, well-known ones.
Ashley Cole was there last.
Yeah, but not as a BME coach, right? He was there in his own right, but we've had others who've come in as BME coaches. Mm-hmm. And those others, they've been there for a short period and then they're gone, right? So it's not a sustainable role. It's no growth there. But Tuchel's come in, pointed his team, his immediate team, and whether they realise it or not, it feels like this role is going to be an afterthought. So they're going to attach. They said they're going to attach a BME candidate. So it feels like it's going to be an afterthought, whether they intended that or not. And then the person's going to come in and do what? What is their role going to be? I'm the England manager. I've chosen my core team. I mean, most people aren't against people choosing their core team. It's the way it goes. But now you're going to attach someone to that almost in a way that a lot of the players I talk to don't want.
Right.
I want to be there on my merit because I've done my badges. I'm ready to go. And you don't want to be seen as a second-class citizen, right? So the game has created this scenario where, yes, we need access to the roles, but the way in which they're doing it just feels so cack-handed. And then again, it points to the leadership, right? You want to bring through a new generation of coaches. You want to make them feel special. You want to give them the confidence to believe they can do this job. They can do other jobs. They're there because of their own right, because they've got the skills, they've got the qualifications, and they're ready to apply themselves. And then you're going to attach it at the very end to the England coach. I'm hoping that they invest, whoever gets the role, they invest in the person properly. They give them every avenue to stay in that role and hopefully develop a sustainable career, whether it be at the FA or a club, because at the moment, I think they're setting up that person to do not as well as they could and they should.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I think the FA itself is, because it's not small, but it's small compared to the big issue that you discussed, which is just huge, which is 92 clubs, where with very little representation. Where in that? So when I think about it in business, I think about first supply, right? We both in both business and in football, we've decided that there isn't a supply issue. There's plenty of people doing it. Then I think about role models.
Yes.
And we talked a bit about Sol. We can go back to that, and Darren Moore. But I also remember, and I might be misquoting him, so Rio Ferdinand, if I'm misquoting you, please, I apologise. But I'm pretty sure I saw him on TV sort of saying, why would I do this when I'm not going to get a job, right? Yeah. Why wouldn't, and we, collective, see us do the badges and not get the job. So it's almost like I'm wasting my time.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think there's an issue with the narrative of people thinking that, because unless people push through, then how's it ever going to change? But we know that people getting the badges, but I'm kind of trying to get to high-profile people. So, because people will say, Gerrard was treated like this, Lampard was treated like this, Rooney was treated like Sol was treated like this, but it's only really Sol. What about Rio? What about more of them trying to make a difference? Do you think there's an issue there?
I talk to a number of players on regular occasions, and they apply for jobs, they try and get jobs. No one wants to be blackballed. I mean, that in itself tells you.
No one wants to be what?
Blackballed, told, you're a troublemaker, we're not going to give you a job. I mean, can you imagine you're trying to defend your right for employment, but in the back of your head, you're thinking, there's so few of us that get jobs. If I raise my voice in this area, I may never get a job.
Oh, right.
Okay. I mean, I'm just giving you that.
Yeah, no, you can't speak out about how difficult it is, because that will mean it becomes even more difficult.
It becomes even more difficult.
Right.
So the 43-4 means you'll never be the 4.
Yeah.
Right? So what kind of industry is that to start with? And then, of course, those who have applied for roles and don't get them and don't progress in them or get fired, I'm not saying it's everyone, but they then think to themselves, well, change? Nothing's ever going to change, because the data has been consistent. The getting jobs data has been consistent for a number of period of time. They're willing for us to be entertainers in terms of playing on the pitch, but not to be leaders. And it's self-evident, and the data's telling them it's self-evident. So getting that change is just getting them to think about that change is hard. So if Rio and others have said, why am I going to put myself in that position because I'm not going to get a job? It's because they've been in the system. They've seen generations before them try. They've seen generations before them get the qualifications, and they've seen those generations not get where they wanted to go. So these guys, very clever, very bright guys, have turned into businessmen and some of them are doing quite well for themselves. Yeah. And they can speak from a position of authority, of building a business from scratch, making it, make a profit, and also be engaging for fans. So they know what they're talking about. They've seen it, right? So that's if big names like that aren't able to secure full-time permanent employment at a senior level, I mean, what chances have most got? I mean, when we crunch the data on access to jobs, it used to be the case, right, that you would say, right, it's hard to get a job in the Premier League, it's hard to get a job in the Championship because they're so sought after. But let's start at the bottom, like Sam Allardyce and Neil Warnock. But those jobs are squeezed as well. Next to nothing is down there, right? As I said, only Darren Moore has got a job down in that that side of the league, right? And you have to go abroad to Liam Rossini to see someone who's outside, who's black, but getting senior job out in France. So the opportunities are getting squeezed more and more and more. When, as I said, the data demonstrates that they're performing very well.
The data suggests they're performing well, and logic suggests that there are diamonds, literally diamonds, in that pool of people, right?
Yeah.
So, because there must be, right?
Yeah.
There just must be,
Yeah.
right? What needs? It seems quite bleak when we talk about it like that, and I suppose it is bleak. I'm kind of going between the two worlds.
Yes.
What do you think needs to change? Is it ownership and leadership? What needs to change to improve the situation?
So the game struggles to change itself, right? I mean, it's the case in most industries, right? We'll always do what we continue to do until someone intervenes.
Yes.
Particularly when you think it's a successful business model. And as far as, most people are concerned, the Premier League is the biggest and best league in the world, and it's the most watched league in the world, and it's, it brings in significant
of almost any sport.
Of almost any sport, right? It's up there with the NBA and the NFL, right?
Correct.
It's a big, and it's doing big sport, doing very well in those terms.
Yeah.
But that's only if you define it in those terms, right? So now we have a piece of legislation going through Parliament, the Football Governance Bill. And that is looking really at the economics, making sure that trying to ensure there's some trickle down from the top clubs to the lower clubs, so we don't have the smaller clubs going out of existence, but also to prevent the formation of a super league, which is what was touted a few years ago. But now we've managed to get EDI inserted into the Football Governance Bill, and the aim there is to bring our data, and as we develop the solutions, bring our solutions into the remit of the independent football regulator, so that we get some transparency and accountability through the game, and that we can get the game from the FA to the Premier League to the EFL to the PFA to the LMA, which is the League Managers Association, to get them working in a different way to how they're currently working with this new form of regulation sitting above it. And that's going to be the big challenge. Can you get some behavioural change through regulation?
What sort of regulation would be required to make that happen? I'm trying to work out what you could insist clubs do to make a change. I've got a few, but I'm really interested.
So these are the sort of solutions that we're going to be working through with some of the work that we've got coming up. But for example, the obvious one is fit and proper test for owners, right? Who are they? What are they? How do they perceive the world? And do they have an issue with employing a diverse group of staff? Right. That is certainly one. The other is data. What sort of data do you collect? How do you analyze that data? How do you make sure that you are not discriminating against a particular workforce over another, right? And therefore, how does that play out in terms of the Equalities Act and various other things? So there are ways in which you can hold the game to account and those individual clubs to account in a way that actually isn't, and this is the thing, it's the most important thing, isn't about stopping the Premier League from growing, because what have I told you? The data tells us you give these guys jobs, the game grows. Give them jobs on the pitch, the game grows. You give them jobs as coaches, their performance is such that the game will grow. So actually, everyone should see this as a win-win, a way of enabling the game to grow, both in terms of performance, enabling the game to grow in terms of a massive audience out there from Europe to North America to across Africa and Asia and so on, because these players are well known everywhere. They are heroes for all these people. But also, you can do the right thing at the same time, right? For the nation, but also for those communities. 92 clubs in 92 communities, where these communities are often diverse and disconnected, where a lot of these players, they come from those communities and want to help and see an opportunity to use their platform to help. It does require a different mindset. We recognize that, and bringing different people in, right, sometimes helps that change in mindset. But I think if the game is open to growing, as it says it is, and doing it in the right way and employing the best people for the job, that's what we want. None of those players who have played the game are not used to not having a contract if they've not performed.
Yeah.
So the game shouldn't worry. If they've not performed and you say on these objective measures they've not performed, they'll walk it, right? So the game should be quite happy about employing people who understand that logistics around if you don't perform, you don't stay in your job. Because these guys, talk about the men, they've been in the game now since the age of 8, 9, 10. They only know football. So, employ the best people. If they're not good enough, they'll accept that.
Yeah, then I get that. When I think of the regulation piece, it makes me think about rules-based change. So you must do this. It brings me to anyone who's ever heard of the Rooney Rule in the NFL, because I explain this to lots. Just so you know, when I'm doing lots of my presentations around this for business, I start with this as the example. I start with football. And I talk about the NBA and I talk about the NFL, right? And I talk about rule-based change versus cultural-based change, right?
Yes.
So I suppose I've got two sort of questions, really. What's your view on being prescriptive, rule-based, like the Rooney Rule has, or tried to be? Anyone who doesn't know, the Rooney Rule meant in the NFL that if you had to have a short list, it had to have at least one, for a coaching role, you used to have at least one black
minority candidate
on the short list.
Yes.
And did well for a while, then not well for a little while. Still better than we are in the Football League, to be honest. Whereas the NBA didn't do anything like that, and they did more of the NBA's for everyone cultural sort of change program. But at the same time, also had owners who were people of colour. Yeah. So what can we learn from our friends across the pond, and where would that leave you thinking we should be in terms of rule-based sort of governance of this sort of space?
Yeah, so we're in the process of actually doing some research which looks across what's happening here and what's happening across the pond. And I think to our listeners out there who are thinking, oh gosh, we're not America, why do we keep learning from America? Well, you may want to know that at least 40 to 50% of the owners in the Premier League are from America, right? So there is that magnificent change, and actually they're now buying clubs in the Championship and elsewhere. So we do need to learn where they've come from. Dealing with the rules-based, cultural-based, I mean, look, the FA has its rule book, right? And nothing's changed, right, in that time.
But the rule book doesn't say who you should interview,
so
the NFL did.
So the rule book says is a big fat document. We need to analyse and look at the rule book in terms of, is there any gaps in that space which could have helped the game do things differently? We don't know. We don't have that level of resource. We're a volunteer organisation who's having to hold the game to account because it refuses to do it itself. But cultural change is always key, but it's hard to get cultural change when at the FA you have no black executives. And just the colour of your skin alone doesn't determine your attitude to these things, but they have zero. And the same with the Premier League, and the same with the EFL. The PFA has, more black people there, interesting times for them.
More, right?
It does have more, and there's interesting changes there. So where are those elements of change makers that can help with a cultural change? Now, going back to your point about what's happening in America, so the Rooney Rule is dismissed by some, welcomed by others. Welcomed by some because at least it means that in front of the panel there is a more diverse group of people, right? And there is an opportunity, therefore, of that person being appointed. And the point I made around...
And there are definitely many more coaches, head coaches and other coaches in the NFL than there were.
Yeah, it's improved, but from a very small base, right? And I think... The reason I raised earlier about what's going on in Scotland is now Reform have got a good chance, whatever your political view, because of their system, they've got a good chance of, now they're in front of the electorate, they've got a good chance of getting some seats, whatever your view on Reform. But you see, in terms of the real results of the Rooney Rule, it's only recently that a black coach, Brian Flores, took legal action against the NFL because he was shortlisted as per the Rooney Rule, but then he got a call out the blue suggesting, "Oh, well done, you got the job," when he hadn't even been interviewed, right? And therefore, and he didn't get the job, he went somewhere else. So sometimes, they say you got to be in the room when it happens, but you're one of 5 people, but they may have already decided who they're employing and they're just going through the process, right? So securing that buy-in from everyone around the table to get the right coach, the best coach, right, is a challenge in itself, as you discovered with the Rooney Rule. But I think there's more analysis that can be done around the positions of people in the NFL who then go on to be senior coaches, as well as learning from another sport like the NBA, which last time I looked had 50% of their coaches.
50% of the head coaches in the NBA are
black, right? And the assistant coaches are around 51%. The general managers, which is almost the equivalent of sporting directors, 40% of those are black. And there's an increasing number of minority ownership, right? So the NBA seems to have taken a step or two forward.
Without rules. They didn't do a Rooney Rule. They didn't have that.
Well, so they probably went down the route of empowering their players more than others. And, we're getting our head, I haven't quite got my head around this because I'm not American, listeners, but the college-based system, the extent to which, the players have come out with not only a college degree, hopefully it's a good one, but also that sense of community and that sense of change and that sense of purpose, right? So, are there lessons we can learn from that, which will be very hard to do because we've got this big and booming academy system where we've got young kids coming through, but only, I think it's 0.0018, 1.2% that make it, right? So we've got some, structurally we are a different beast to both the NBA and the NFL, but I think there's always lessons to be learned internationally, and we'll be looking at that.
It's really interesting because when I think about this for corporate organisations, one of the things that I say is there's a two-pronged way of looking at this. There is that the organisation needs to change, right? So that we know, similar thing, that very few senior leaders or even middle managers are black or people of colour, right? And we need to change that. We need to create a pipeline of talent, right? And I think the same thing exists there. So we've got to change the culture of the organisation so it will accept these people. So the football culture needs to change, right? Using my language, right? The culture needs to change so that when those people get jobs, they don't get fired straight away or whatever. They get more chances, they get more leeway, the same leeway, culture. And then, but I equally think we need to give the emerging talented people of colour what I call scaffolding support to be successful. This podcast, I've had now tens of people who've been successful come sit where you're sitting, and they've all had that sort of scaffolding of self-worth, of grit, determination, resilience, growth mindset, active learners, networkers. Right?
Brilliant.
They've had that. Whether they did, no one designed it. It's me that's codified what they have, right? So my question to you is, are we doing enough of that sort of thing with the emerging coaches of the future, like to get them ready for the trials and tribulations of trying to get those jobs? Because you do need to keep turning up, you do need to keep self-learning, you do need to understand networking, you do need to know all those sort of things. Is there something there that needs to be done?
I always think there's someone who looks at problems from both sides, or all sides if possible. You've always got to look at what more you can do to progress. You can never just point the finger at someone else and say it's 100% there. The problem you have, of course, when you start doing that, having spoken to people in the game, they then put the onus on the player rather than recognise what their issues are. Right, and that's
same in business, by the way.
Same.
Football is a business.
It is a business, right? And actually, the people who own football, they come from a business background, and many people now involved in football off the pitch are also from a business background, right? And now we're going to have regulation, which is going to be by people who've worked in, whether it be government or elsewhere, right? So it is indeed a business like most other business, but what we have is fans who watch and observe the game every week, 2-3 times a week sometimes. And so yes, there is definitely something needs to be done in terms of maintaining your qualifications, maintaining a broad breadth of who you are and what you are and what your purpose is, maintaining that resilience so you still do apply for jobs and you are resilient around the process, that sometimes you won't get the role, etc. And maintaining a network of role models and others you can help and assist in terms of help with guidance and so on. There's a whole lot that's required for any kind, black, white, brown, right?
For everyone.
We all need that,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it's not specific to the black coach. What we're saying is, sadly, the data tells us you can have all of that and yet still not progress on the other side because there's a, as we call it, a glass ceiling preventing you from breaking through.
Like that.
Right? So breaking that glass ceiling is tough. So when lessons for business, and why we say this is, in football, you can get all the data you want. So if you want to say not enough people are applying for jobs, well, you can come to football and get a sense from the footballers. Do you apply for jobs? When do you apply for jobs? What do your CVs look like, etc.? Oh, gosh, when they come for interview, they're not prepared. Okay, you can get a sense of that.
Yeah.
And then you can get a sense of performance, which is the number one thing for many businesses is around performance. When I put you in this role, what's going to be the return on my £1 investment in you, right? Is there going to be a positive synergy? What does that look like, right? But of course, now we're faced with a different, if I may say, political landscape. So we've got various corporate, well-known companies dropping their DEI initiatives, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, because it's best person for the job. And you know what? Yeah, in football, that's what they want, the best person for the job. But they're not getting the jobs based on the best person for the job. So dropping DEI in other initiatives, in other areas, whether it be Meta or elsewhere, when actually you've not learnt the lessons from an area like football, which can actually tell you around the process of application, around the process of staying in jobs, around the process of getting fired, and what some of those issues are, means that actually you're cutting programs which, for those outside of football, where it's obvious what your performance levels are, or at least more obvious, you're actually telling those people who have gone to college, gone to university, done all the scaffolding stuff we talked about, and they're job ready, that now we're going to perhaps be employing people that don't look like you anymore, not because of the performance level, but just because we've got this anti-woke thing going on and we've decided that we're going to turn the clock back, in my view, right? When actually you just want the best person for the job. Right? Yeah. So we've actually, by shelving the DEI initiatives, what they've actually said is, in my understanding, we're shelving them because we realise that we no longer want the best people for the job, but because it's politically expedient to shelve it. That is turning an argument on its head, which is demonstrating the point people have made all along. You only need DEI initiatives if you've not been employing the right people in the first place, and you need to force an intervention to get there because there are some cultural or maybe rule-based issues. And now you've dropped them when it hasn't worked because of a variety of reasons. You're basically saying we're going to go back to where we were before.
But actually, I think that's interesting. My view on it is, I mean, obviously it's not great, and it's all packaged a bit in the wrong way, and some of these wokeisms have gone far too far the wrong way. At the end of the day, the beauty of being a sports fan or being a team-based person is meritocracy, right? But best can mean lots of different things. The best person, what does best actually even mean? I read a survey that says actually in business, relative performance is very marginal, unless you are smashing the lights out, the best.
Like in any business, right? Or any area.
And that's like 5%,
1%.
Very small. Like Mo Salah, loads of other wingers.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
Right? But their relative performance is marginal, right? So actually there's no reason why there can't be a massive diversity there, because actually the relative performance is very small. The change in performance is very small. And actually, but we do know that more diverse teams in business perform better. McKinsey's approved it many, many times. You read the report many, many times. So actually, the best person for the job might be actually average performance of normal metric, but adds diversity, is the best candidate. You know, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You have to redefine best.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's not just fastest.
Yes. So there's a lot of mediocrity out there. And what we're saying is, why can't everyone, no matter what their skin color and where they're from, why can't every one of us, and I say us, we're mediocre, get a job the same way as someone else that doesn't look like us?
Yeah.
Right? But there is now a political dimension to what that looks like, and that's the scary thing, I think. And that's the worrying thing, because I think for fans and for customers, right, consumers, you just want the best of, if you're going to pay for something, are you getting value for money, right? Yeah. And now we've got layered in different arguments which are taking us into a space where you no longer want value for money, you no longer want something that's the best quality, you no longer want X, Y, and Z, because someone's now giving you a new theory of what good looks like.
Well, maybe if Nuno can win, or not win, maybe he'll win the Premier League. Maybe he'll get top 4, even get top 6. Everyone will see that as major outperformance. And one thing we do know about football and football fans, no one cares as long as they're winning.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
No one cares, and no one goes. And that might open up windows or opportunities for others. I do think you need pioneers and leaders to make people rewire what good looks like.
Yes.
And he in the moment is rewiring what good looks like. And I think it's really important that people keep, for me, these marquee players keep showing up. Don't think, well, I'll never get it, because they're the future. And I suppose my sort of not concluding question, because I'll ask a couple more, but is, where's this all going?
I hope it's going to a place where black players are empowered, fans are better informed, and the game is willing to look in on itself a little more than it does, to understand that for the game to grow and the game to be relevant to new generation of people coming through, therefore it needs to be sustainable, and to, with the eyes of the world upon it, that the game needs to actually do more than what it's doing, to bring people who have been outside looking into the system, so that glass ceiling is broken, and that black players feel that when they go into a room, they have every chance of making it like they do when it comes to being a professional footballer.
Yeah. And you once told me, and I thought it was interesting, that some of these players are like gods as players, but once they take the boots off, they're just like normal human beings, and that's quite a big adjustment for them to make, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, so, you go to, I went to the Emirates, as I said at the beginning, and there's 60,000 people there celebrating, let's say, Saka as a player, right? And every one of those 60,000 would love to be in his shoes. Yeah. And if you can't be in his shoes, you'd love to be in a photo with him. You'd love to get his shirt, right? He's like godlike. Yeah. But actually, Saka, love him as we all do, he's like the best hedge fund manager in the world, right? Or one of them. He's like the best accountant in the world, the best lawyer in the world, right? He just so happens to be in an area of skill and a profession where there are loads of people who see him every week and want to be him. Yes. Right? So I think, when we think of the talent and the talent coming through and black players and what they're doing, do you know what? Hopefully where this is going is we say to ourselves, they're only normal human beings who are talented at playing football and putting the ball in there. They get paid well because we're willing to watch it. They get paid well because they put the ball in there and they stop the ball going in the back of the net. But we need to recognise that they are only humans when they play in that game. They are locked in with their super duper powers to do all those things on the pitch. But when they come off the pitch, they are only human. They do everything that we do, right? They laugh, cry, they hug, they kiss, they fall over, they do the same things. It just so happens that we think we know them through the power of the camera and through the power of a mic. But, they are, when they finish their careers, right, they can't live off, most of them, off being the talent they were alone, right? Footballers, like most sports people, but footballers in particular, they retire twice. They retire at the age of 35 and then whatever, or roughly 35 and around that area, and then they retire again, whatever career they have thereafter, right? They've got to scurry around. If they're not getting jobs in football when they're qualified for it, they have to scurry around for purpose, job, and so on after the game. So yes,
same as all footballers. Though.
Same as all footballers, but with the black footballers, they're less likely to get roles, and if they do get roles, they're more likely to get fired, right? Yeah. So that's the issue they've got. Is we are up there with the best on the pitch, but then once we get off the pitch, we're where football's concerned, we're treated as second-class citizens because we now can't get those roles off the pitch, and where are they often? And all power to them. They become pundits. They become excellent pundits, but that cannot be the only only a tiny number of people can become pundits, right? But and doth cap to those people who become pundits, because it's not easy, because you have to entertain millions of people every week. But vast majority of them just want to get a worthwhile, meaningful job, and they're not getting access to those.
I know our time's drawing to a close, but I'm going to ask a quick thing on the punditry thing, which is, but doesn't that also happen because in the TV world there is a pressure to have more representation in front of the camera and behind it when it comes to former footballers? It would be very hard to have a panel now that was just all ex-white footballers.
So again, if you
even male,
indeed, if you study the punditry developments over decades, there's been a shift, right? There was a time when there were no black players,
correct,
even though they were playing, right? And now there are a greater number. What we want to ensure is that there's a multiplicity of black faces. So you get those who entertain, fine, they can be entertainers, and then you get those who are technical pundits, right? We should not find ourselves in the position where we're always deemed to be the jokers and the comedian, and not the serious pundit who's turned to for what is your match analysis and what should Arteta and Slot and the rest do next, right? And that's the other big challenge. And again, it feeds into the stereotype within games, right? Yes. In order for us to be successful, we have to act in X, Y, and Z. But actually, no. What does success look like? Do you understand the game? Can we communicate the game? Can you be serious about the game? When we go to a break in proceedings, can you help us through to that break in a serious way? And then when we come back, can you then blend in and allow the program to progress for the fans, for the viewer, right? Yeah. So we've got to be able to have, yes, entertainment roles, but also leadership roles in those punditry roles. And I think those are important issues.
Look, we've used so much of the time on this. I knew this would happen, which is great. So we haven't talked much about you. We'll have to have you back to talk about you in particular. But in closing, what motivates you, and how will you know when you've won?
Look, winning in this is like a piece of string, right? I mean, it's very difficult. Right? Yeah, I think so. I think, look, we've got this governance bill. We're proud that EDI is on that, right? We set up 3 years ago, and we're pleased that we're being taken seriously, and that Parliament is using our data, that serious legacy networks are using our data. Yeah. And we're also proud that players are homing in on the message and are coming to us for not only football advice, but other issues that they have around, contracts and personal issues. That to me is already a win, because we didn't expect to be here. But when I'm a young lad from Wolverhampton, or at least used to be. Yeah. And I was brought up by
Big up the Midlands,
the West Midlands in particular. Yeah.
Not the East Midlands.
Not the East Midlands. We love you, East Midlands, but we prefer the West. I was brought up by my mom, who's brilliant, still around today. Love her dearly. Big role model for me, alongside my grandfather, who fought in World War II, and hard work, grit, getting things done. Being part of communities of all colours, of all persuasions, not discriminating against people, and just going for your goals. Those are the kind of things they brought us up with. And I looked the other day at my primary school rounders team, because we won a trophy. My brother blowing up a photo. And it's the most diverse group of people you have ever met. And it was way before, sorry listeners, if you're listening, I'm not 20, right? It's way before all these BLM issues kicked off. You've got blonde-haired, blue eyes, you've got brown-skinned people, you've got black people, you've got short, you've got tall, and we were just a team, and we worked together as a team, right? So, and then you go fast forward to my secondary school, again, comprehensive school in the heart of Wolverhampton. We were multi-ethnic, multi-diverse, some poor like me, some doing quite well, from teachers down to doctors, down to bus drivers. My grandfather, having fought in the World War, then became a bus driver. But we worked well together, we lived well together. Tough times, because down the road was Enoch Powell, who had his own ideas on what immigration and Wolverhampton should look like. But actually, I had so many positive memories around some difficult and challenging conditions, right? So for me, football is like a difficult and challenging condition where there are people who want to change the game, and those are the people I want to find. And I want the game to be relevant for my children and their friends and their family going forward. I mean, when I was a kid, Mr. Roden was my headmaster at my primary school, clearly now passed. And he used to talk to my mother about, motivating me to be the best I could be, right? And I say this to your listeners, and you're going to think, gosh, why have I been listening for so long? But I became the first black head boy at my primary school. And then at my secondary school, I had Mr. Berry, who was my deputy head teacher, who I still speak to this day. Fantastic man. Wolf supporter, unfortunately, but a fantastic man. and I became the first black head boy of that secondary school, right? And at the time, I was just the head boy. But over time, I've come to realize that actually there was a symbol there to say to people, he could do it, you can too. Yeah. We need that to happen in football, right? Yes. We need more of that. He can do it based on performance, because I didn't just get handpicked and here you are. The teachers had to vote for me and the pupils had to vote for me, right? And those guys who want to become managers and coaches who have done their badges, they want to be there on merit too. They don't want no handouts. So
no one wants that.
No one wants it. No one wants the handout. This is the idiotic thing about these people who say, it's the best person for the job. They just want the best person for the job, right? And every time you're a fan and then your club decides they're going to get rid of a manager because they've lost 3 in a row or 6 in a row, whatever it might be, that person clearly wasn't the best person for the job. Yeah. So why are you going to go and hire someone who's got a similar CV again to do the same kind of role again? Yeah. Yeah, so we got to educate people, and I'm very lucky that where I grew up, I was educated by some good role models at my school who were white men, grey men, chubby men, right? And some wonderful women. Mrs. Stanton was one of them. Mrs. Jones was another, right? And I had a wonderful community of my mom, my uncle, and my aunts, and all sorts of people, could go on about my friends' parents and so on. And we like to live well, and we like to live together. We like to bring people together, and we like success, right? And we like success based on talent. And unfortunately, I've ended up in Black Footballers Partnership, which I never, ever intended to do. I never intended to work for an organisation with black in its title. I just wanted to do good things. Yeah. And here I am working in Black Footballers Partnership because unfortunately, no one's crunching the data to tell the story. And I guess it's because of my mom and my grandfather who told me to watch the news and look at change and understand the big issues that are going out there to help others. And that's why we do this work, to help others.
I think you're an incredible example. Thanks for that, by the way, because it fills in a bit of the gaps about what makes you you. The rich heritage, community spirit, togetherness, collaboration, all of these incredible things mean that you were crazy enough to step forward to try and solve a seriously hard problem. Yeah. And I think we need more people like you who are willing to put what they do to one side to step into a difficult thing to solve. And I, having listened to you for the last hour, there's no doubt in my mind that whether this problem can be solved, that with your input and others, and I'm very happy to help as well, we can at least get it moving in the right direction. So it creates something for the younger kids coming through to believe that that's a thing that they can do. Because ultimately, for it to work, people have got to believe that it can happen.
Absolutely.
It can happen.
Agreed.
They need the role models. We need success stories.
Yes.
In whether it's in business or in sport or in anything, you need success stories to rewire everyone's head. But everything that you're doing and doing it the right way with data, government bills, intervention, regulation, it's like you're trying every single different way to try and make a change. And I think that's amazing. Thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. I'm in huge admiration of what you're trying to achieve. As I said, happy to support in any way I can. And we'll have to get you back again to see what progress we're making. So, Delroy, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Great podcast. Race to the Top. Thanks for inviting me.
Big up. Race to the Top. Thanks, guys.